The wind blew across the empty field, carrying the smell of smoke and burned metal. Daniel walked slowly, his boots pressing into the dry ground. His eyes moved left and right, searching for anything useful. He was a scavenger, nothing more. He lived by walking through battlefields, finding pieces of scrap and selling them in the human market. But today felt different. The air was heavy, not only with dust but with silence. Even the birds did not sing. Daniel stopped. He saw black smoke rising in the distance, against the orange sky. It looked like a signal fire. He frowned, pulled his scarf tighter around his face and walked toward it. As he moved closer, the shape of a wreck appeared. A ship, not human. It had alien curves, smooth silver walls now broken and burned. One wing was torn away, lying half buried in the ground. Daniel hesitated. His heart beat faster. Sometimes, alien ships still carried survivors. Sometimes they carried things more dangerous. He stepped carefully. His boots crunched on broken glass and metal. Heat still came from the wreck. Flames had eaten through the sides, leaving black scars. The smell of burned plastic and flesh made his stomach twist. Daniel raised his hand to cover his nose. He wanted to turn back, but something held him. Then he heard it. A sound, faint, soft, not from the ship's engine, not from the wind. A cry. He froze, his ears sharpened. Yes, it was there again. A weak, trembling cry. The sound of life, the sound of someone still breathing. Daniel pushed a broken panel aside. Sparks fell. He stepped into the shadow of the wreck. His eyes adjusted to the dark. And there, in the corner, he saw them. A woman, not human. Her skin pale blue, her long hair covered in dust and ash. Her arms wrapped around a small child. The child glowed faintly, soft light coming from his skin like a star under a blanket. The woman's eyes opened when she heard Daniel. She looked weak, her lips cracked, but she held her child tighter. Daniel's breath caught. He had seen aliens before, but never like this. She was not a soldier, not a fighter. She was broken, lost. Her body shook with fear, yet her eyes begged without words. She did not speak his language, but Daniel understood. She wanted him to help. The baby gave a soft cry again. Daniel felt something in his chest, a pull. He stepped forward slowly, raising his hands to show he had no weapon. Easy, he whispered, though he knew she would not understand. The woman pressed her child to her chest, as if ready to shield him from Daniel. Her breathing was weak. Daniel could see blood on her side. He knew she had little time. The baby looked up at him with wide, glowing eyes. And for a moment, the battlefield disappeared. It was just him, the mother, and her child. Daniel hesitated. He knew what the village would say. They would call him a fool for bringing aliens home. They would say they were dangerous, that they could bring trouble. But could he really leave them here to die in the cold wreck? He looked at the baby again. The little hand reached out toward him, fingers trembling. His heart broke. Daniel stepped closer and knelt. The woman tried to whisper. Her voice was dry and broken. "Please," she said. The word was weak, but he understood it clearly. She could speak at least a little. Her eyes filled with tears, shining through the ash on her face. Daniel nodded slowly. He reached out, gently touching the child's hand. The baby gripped his finger, tiny but strong. In that moment, Daniel made his choice. He would not leave them. He would carry them away from this place. He took off his coat and wrapped it around the woman and her baby. She trembled as warmth covered her. Daniel lifted her carefully. She was lighter than he thought, almost too weak to stand on her own. The baby made a soft sound, pressing against her chest. Daniel carried them out of the wreck. The setting sun cast long shadows across the field. The burned ship stood like a grave, but Daniel did not look back. He walked through the dust step by step, feeling the weight in his arms. Yet he also felt something else, a strange warmth inside, not from the coat, but from the choice he had made behind him. The ship crackled as fire ate through the last of its walls. Ahead of him the path was long and lonely, but for the first time in years, Daniel did not feel alone. He carried more than just bodies. He carried hope. The night was cold, and Daniel's shelter was nothing more than wood and metal patched together. The roof leaked when it rained, the walls shook in the wind, but tonight it felt like a fortress. He laid the alien woman on a rough bed made of blankets. The baby clung to her chest, glowing faintly like a lantern in the dark. Daniel sat near the fire, feeding it with pieces of broken wood. He looked at them again. The woman's face was pale, her breathing uneven. Her lips moved as if whispering words, but Daniel could not understand. He felt helpless. He wished he knew her language. He wished he could ease her pain. The baby made a soft sound, half cry, half sigh. Daniel frowned. He reached for his bag, pulling out the last piece of bread he had saved for himself. He hesitated, hunger biting his stomach. But when he saw the child's trembling mouth, he tore the bread in half. He offered it carefully. The woman hesitated, then accepted, breaking it into small pieces for the child. For the first time since Daniel found them, the baby smiled. A weak smile, but real. The glow on the child's skin grew brighter for a moment, filling the dark room with soft light. Daniel blinked. He had never seen anything like it. He felt the warmth touch his heart. The woman looked at him with tired eyes. She tried to speak again. Her voice was low, broken, but one word came through. "Safe," she said. She placed her hand over the child's head and then looked at Daniel. "Safe," she repeated. Daniel nodded, though he wasn't sure if she understood. "Safe," he said back, his voice steady, his promise silent but strong. As the night went deeper, the fire burned low. Daniel kept watch. His rifle rested against the wall. His ears strained for sounds outside. The forest was quiet, but he felt eyes on him. He stepped outside once, scanning the dark trees. The wind rustled the leaves, and shadows moved like shapes of men. Daniel's gut twisted. He was not alone, he was sure of it. He went back inside, checking the door and windows. He could not risk sleeping. He had to protect them. He looked again at the mother and child. The woman's head rested on the pillow, her hand wrapped tightly around her baby. Even in her weakness, she did not let go. Daniel thought about the village, about the people who would see them as enemies. He thought of the men who hated aliens, the ones who said all outsiders were dangerous. He knew they would never accept her. They would say he was a fool. They would call him a traitor. They might even drive him out. Still, as he looked at the baby's small, glowing face, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Family. The word hit him like a hammer. He had lost his own family long ago. War had taken them. But maybe life had given him another chance. A chance to protect, to care, to keep something alive. The baby stirred, eyes opening slightly. They were bright, not like human eyes, but filled. With wonder, the child reached a small hand toward Daniel. Daniel's heart trembled. He moved closer and let the baby grip his finger. The child's touch was warm, almost like fire. The woman opened her eyes again. She watched him. Her lips moved, and though the words were broken, Daniel caught them. "Not leave," she whispered. Her eyes filled with tears. She was begging him. Daniel leaned closer, his voice steady, his eyes serious. "I won't leave," he said. The words were simple, but heavy. A promise made in the dark, a promise to strangers who had no one else. The baby yawned and pressed against the woman's chest. Slowly, they both drifted into sleep. The fire crackled low. Daniel sat there, eyes fixed on the shadows outside. His hand rested on his rifle, but his heart rested on the silent promise he had made. Hours passed. The wind carried strange sounds, branches snapping, a faint light moving between the trees. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. He thought of the raiders, of the men who might be hunting the woman and her child. He thought of the whispers in the hills he had heard before. He was sure trouble would come, but he did not move. He stayed at his post, his back straight, his eyes sharp. The woman had asked him not to leave. The child had gripped his hand. Daniel had made a choice, and he would not turn away now. As dawn painted the sky in pale colors, Daniel still sat awake, his eyes burned with exhaustion, but his spirit did not break. He looked at them once more. The woman asleep, the baby glowing faintly in her arms. Daniel felt something rise in his chest, a strength he thought he had. Lost, he whispered to himself, almost too soft to hear. They're my family now. The words were not just thought, they were truth. A silent promise made in the dust, carried into the light of morning. The sun rose over the valley, sending golden light across the fields. Daniel walked the dirt road toward the human village. His steps were heavy, not because of the distance, but because of the weight of his choice. Behind him, in his shelter, the alien widow and her baby rested. He had left them hidden, promising he would return quickly. The village was small but busy. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the sound of voices filled the air. Farmers carried baskets, merchants opened stalls, and children ran through the streets. But when Daniel entered, many heads turned. People lowered their voices, their eyes followed him, whispering as if he carried a secret. Daniel ignored them at first. He went to the market, trading scraps of metal for food and cloth. He picked bread, dried meat, and a small jug of water. The merchant, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, looked at him strangely. "You're buying more than usual," he said. "Feeding someone else?" Daniel froze. He gave no answer. The merchant narrowed his eyes but said no more. Still, the silence around them grew heavier. It was as if everyone could smell the truth, as if the dust on Daniel's coat carried the story of the wreck. A group of men stood near the well. They were hunters, broad-shouldered and loud. One of them called out, "Daniel!" His tone was not friendly. Daniel turned slowly. The man spat on the ground. "We heard you were near the battlefield yesterday," he said. "Found anything strange?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Scrap metal," he replied. "Nothing else." The men exchanged glances. They did not believe him. One stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you're hiding one of them, it'll bring trouble on all of us." His eyes were hard. "Aliens don't belong here." Daniel said nothing. He picked up his sack and walked away. But behind him, the whispers rose, louder this time. People spoke in hushed tones. "He's hiding something. Foolish man, bringing danger." The words stung, but Daniel kept moving. Back at his shelter, the widow stirred when he returned. Her eyes were weak, but relief showed on her face when she saw him. She reached for the food, not for herself, but for the child. The baby clapped small glowing hands, laughing softly as Daniel gave them bread. Daniel sat down. He spoke even though he knew she might not understand. "The village is talking," he said. "They suspect." She tilted her head, not knowing the words, but she saw the worry in his eyes. She touched his arm gently as if telling him to be strong over the next days. Daniel tried to keep them hidden. He worked quietly, bringing food and water. He mended the shelter with old boards. He even found a blanket to keep them warm. The baby grew stronger, laughter filling the small home. The sound made Daniel smile, yet it also filled him with fear. Laughter could be heard, and if the wrong ears heard, danger would come. One evening, Daniel sat by the fire. The woman tried to speak again. Her words were broken, but he caught fragments. Her name was Sarah. The child was Leora. Daniel repeated the name softly. She smiled faintly, the first smile he had seen on her face. In that moment, something invisible connected them, stronger than language. But outside the shelter, danger grew. The hunters from the village had started following Daniel. They watched where he went, counting how often he returned home. One night, Daniel saw a shadow near the trees. He raised his rifle, but the figure slipped away. The message was clear. They were watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. Inside, Sarah felt the fear too. She held her baby close at night, her eyes full of worry. She whispered her own language, songs Daniel could not understand, but the sadness in her voice was enough. Daniel sat near the fire, listening, his heart heavy. He knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers became something worse. The village was not blind. Already, children spoke of seeing strange light in the hills. They said a baby glowed like a star. The stories spread, turning into warnings. Some said it was a curse. Others said it was a signal calling raiders. Each rumor twisted the truth, making Daniel the center of suspicion. And yet, every time he thought of letting go, of sending them away, he saw Leora's eyes, wide and innocent. He felt her small hand gripping his finger. He remembered Sarah's whisper, not, "Leave." The promise he made echoed inside him, stronger than the voices outside. One night, as the fire dimmed, Daniel heard footsteps outside the shelter. His body tensed. He grabbed his rifle, ready for danger, but the steps stopped, and a whisper drifted through the cracks in the wood. "We know what you're hiding, Daniel." The voice was cold. "You can't protect them forever." Daniel stood frozen. The words cut deeper than any blade. He turned slowly toward Sarah and Leora. They were asleep, safe for now, but the promise he had made felt heavier than ever. He whispered to himself, steady and quiet, "They're my family, I won't give them up." The night swallowed his words, but his heart held them like iron. The murmurs of the village were no longer whispers. They were storms gathering on the horizon, and Daniel knew the storm would soon reach his door. The fire in Daniel's shelter burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls. Sarah sat close to the flames, holding her child. Her eyes were distant, lost in memories that weighed heavy on her heart. Daniel watched her silently. He knew she carried secrets. He could see them in her trembling hands and the fear that never left her face. At last she spoke, her voice weak, her words broken, but Daniel listened carefully. Her language was strange, but every now and then a word slipped through that he understood. With her hands, she tried to explain, drawing shapes in the dirt floor, a circle for her people, a line breaking through it. She pointed to herself, then to her baby. Daniel leaned closer, trying to piece the story together. She whispered the word clan several times, then pointed upward, her face filled with pain. Slowly, Daniel understood. Her ship had not been destroyed by humans. It had been attacked by her own kind. The realization hit him like a stone. Sarah was not running from strangers. She was running from her people. Her eyes grew wet as she whispered another word. "Husband." She drew a small mark in the dirt, then brushed it away with shaking fingers. Daniel's chest tightened. He understood enough. Her husband had stood against them, and he had been killed. She was a widow not only of war, but of betrayal. She touched the baby's arm, showing Daniel the faint, glowing mark on Leora's skin. The glow shimmered softly, not like ordinary light, but alive. Daniel frowned. His eyes lifted to meet hers. She spoke again, this time with more. "For some special," she said, pointing to the child, her voice cracked. Filled with both fear and pride, Daniel understood. The child was not just a baby. She was something more, something her clan wanted. Sarah shook her head violently, gripping Leora tight. She whispered a string of words Daniel could not follow, but her eyes begged him to see the danger. If they found her, they would take the child, and Sarah would never see her again. The silence in the room grew heavy. Daniel leaned back, his mind racing. It all made sense now. The raiders, the shadows in the forest, the whispers near the village. They weren't just rumors. Someone had been tracking them, and it was only a matter of time before the hunters arrived at his door. That night, Daniel did not sleep. He sat with his rifle across his lap, watching the door, listening to every sound outside. The forest seemed alive with whispers, branches snapping, footsteps crunching on dry leaves. His heart pounded as the hours dragged by. Every shadow looked like an enemy. Every rustle felt like danger. At one point, he thought he saw lights moving between the trees, faint and flickering. He raised his rifle, aiming through the cracks of the wall, but the lights faded, leaving only the sound of the wind. Still, his gut told him it had not been a trick. They were there, watching, waiting. Inside, Sarah sang softly to the child. Her song was sad, filled with longing. Daniel could not understand the words, but he felt the sorrow. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. The sound of her voice touched something deep inside him, reminding him of his own mother, of nights long ago when life was still whole. When the song ended, Sarah looked at Daniel. She whispered, "Danger," then pointed outside. Her hands trembled as she spoke. She knew they were being hunted. She knew the shadows were not just in her past. They were at their door. Daniel's jaw tightened. He stood and checked his rifle again. He looked back at her, his voice steady, though his heart was heavy. "They'll have to go through me first," he said. She may not have understood the words, but she understood the look. In his eyes, the following day, Daniel went to the edge of the village, trying to learn if anyone had seen strangers. The people there avoided his gaze. Their whispers grew louder. Some accused him outright. "You've brought trouble to us," one woman hissed. "Whatever you're hiding will burn us all." Daniel turned away, refusing to argue, but the weight of their fear pressed on him. When he returned to the shelter, he found Sarah standing at the doorway. Leora in her arms, her eyes were wide with terror. She pointed to the hills. Daniel followed her gaze and his blood ran cold. Smoke was rising again, not from wreckage this time, but from fires lit on purpose. A signal. Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened. The raiders were close. The shadows of Sarah's past had followed her here, and they were no longer whispers in the dark. They were flames in the hills coming for her child. Sarah's knees weakened. She almost fell. Daniel rushed to catch her, his arms steadying both mother and child. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered the same word again. "Please." It was the only word she seemed to know fully in his language, and it was enough. Daniel nodded, his jaw set like iron. He looked at the hills, at the fire rising against the sky. "I promised," he whispered. "I won't let them take you." Inside the shelter, the fire burned low, casting shadows on the walls, but the true shadows were no longer inside. They were coming closer, step by step, carrying the weight of Sarah's past and the danger of tomorrow. And Daniel knew the time for hiding was ending. The time for standing would soon come. The smoke on the hills grew thicker, curling into the evening sky like black fingers. Daniel stood outside his shelter with his rifle in hand. His eyes did not blink, his body still as stone. Behind him, Sarah held Leora close to her chest, her face pale, her lips whispering words in her own language. Daniel could not understand them, but he knew they were prayers. The first shadow appeared near the trees. Then another, and another. Men stepped out, armored in scraps of metal and leather, their weapons sharp and cruel. They were not strangers. They were the raiders Sarah had warned of, her clan. They had come for the child. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward, his skin the same pale blue as Sarah's, his eyes cold as ice. He raised his hand and spoke in a harsh voice. Sarah gasped, clutching Leora tighter. Daniel glanced back. "What did he say?" he asked. She swallowed hard, her eyes filled with dread. "They want baby," she whispered. Her voice shook. "If not, they kill." Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened, his jaw set like iron. He stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the raiders. The tall one barked something again, pointing his blade at Daniel. The others laughed cruelly, as if the sight of one human standing against them was nothing but a joke. Sarah pulled on Daniel's sleeve, her eyes begging. "No fight," she whispered. "They too many." Her voice cracked. She was ready to give herself up, ready to surrender for her child's life. But Daniel shook his head slowly, his voice calm but firm. "Family is worth fighting for," he said, "even if we are not the same blood." The raiders moved closer, their boots crunching on the dirt. The tall one snarled and shouted something again. Daniel did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Give them the child, or die. Daniel raised his rifle. His voice rang out steady and strong. "You'll get her over my dead body." The raiders paused for a moment, surprised at the fire in his eyes. Then they laughed again, cruel and mocking. They spread out, circling him, blades flashing in the dim light. Inside the shelter, Leora began to cry, her glow pulsing like a small star. The light cut through the shadows, making the raiders hiss, their eyes fixed on her, hungry and greedy. Sarah tried to hush the child, but the glow only grew brighter. The tall raider sneered and shouted, charging forward. Daniel fired. The crack of the rifle split the air. The raider staggered back, clutching his shoulder. The others roared with rage, rushing at Daniel with blades raised. Daniel fired again, dropping another to the ground, but they were too many, and soon they were upon him. Daniel swung the rifle like a club, striking one across the jaw. He kicked, another back. His body burned with strength he did not know he had, but their blades slashed at him, cutting through his coat. Pain seared his arm, blood staining the dirt. Still he stood tall, refusing to fall. Sarah cried out. She placed Leora on the bed and rushed forward, her hands glowing faintly as she pressed them against Daniel's wound. The pain dulled, the bleeding slowed. Daniel's eyes widened at the strange power, but there was no time to ask. Another raider lunged and Daniel pushed Sarah back, firing his last bullet into the man's chest. The sound of the battle echoed through the valley, and in the distance the village heard. At first they hesitated. Some said Daniel had brought this trouble on himself, but others remembered his kindness, remembered his strength. Slowly men grabbed their tools, pitchforks, axes, even old rifles. They marched toward the smoke, toward the sound of gunfire. Back at the shelter, Daniel fought with everything he had, his rifle empty. He grabbed a broken plank and swung it, knocking one raider to the ground. His chest heaved, sweat and blood mixing on his face. Still, he refused to step aside. He blocked the doorway, his body a shield. The tall raider sneered, raising his blade high. "You cannot stop us." Sarah whispered the translation, her eyes wide with terror. Daniel spat blood, his voice sharp like steel. "Try me." The blade came down, but before it struck, a shout rang out from behind. Villagers charged into the clearing, torches blazing, weapons raised. The raiders turned in shock, not expecting resistance from so many. The villagers roared, striking with fury. They had mocked Daniel before, but now they stood at his side. The battle grew fierce, firelight and steel clashing in the dark. Daniel fought among them, Sarah shielding the child with her body. Leora's glow filled the shelter, shining brighter than ever. The raiders faltered, fear flickering in their eyes. The mark of the child was too much for them to face. Step by step, the raiders fell back. Some fled into the trees, others lay broken on the ground. The tall raider cursed, his eyes burning with hatred. He pointed at Sarah and Leora, shouting a promise of return. Then he vanished into the forest, his men scattering with him. Silence fell at last, only broken by the crackle of torches and the cries of the wounded. Daniel stood in the doorway, his body trembling, his clothes torn, his arm bleeding, but his eyes burning with fire. The villagers looked at him, no longer with suspicion, but with respect. Sarah rushed to his side, her hands glowing faintly as she healed his wounds again. Her tears fell on his chest as she whispered, "Safe." Daniel placed his hand over hers, his voice soft but firm. "As long as I breathe," he said, "you're safe." The villagers gathered around, some ashamed for doubting him, some proud. To stand beside him for the first time, Daniel was not alone. For the first time, Sarah and Leora were not just refugees. They were part of something greater, a family not bound by blood but by choice. But Daniel knew this was not the end. The raiders would come again. They would not forget. Yet as he looked at Sarah and Leora, and at the villagers standing with him, he felt a strength deeper than fear. He had stood his ground and he would stand again. The night was heavy with smoke. The smell of burned wood and blood clung to the air. Daniel stood outside his shelter, his chest rising and falling as if he had carried the weight of the world. Around him, the villagers tended to the wounded. Some lay on the ground with cuts and bruises. Others leaned on each other for support. The battle was over, but the memory of it burned like fire. Sarah sat near the doorway with Leora in her arms. The baby's glow was softer now, fading back into a gentle light. Sarah's eyes stayed on Daniel. She saw the cuts on his arms, the blood that stained his shirt. Her heart trembled with both fear and gratitude. She whispered words in her language, words Daniel did not understand, but her tears told him enough. The villagers gathered. Some still glared at Sarah with doubt, their voices low and sharp. "She brought this on us," one man muttered. "The raiders came for her. They will come again." Another spat on the ground. "She is a curse," but others spoke differently. "Daniel fought for them," a woman said firmly. "He stood against death for a mother and her child," an old man nodded. "If he sees them as family, then they are family." The murmurs clashed like fire against water, doubt and loyalty fighting in every corner of the village. Daniel lifted his rifle, broken and empty. He looked at the villagers, his voice steady though his body ached. "They came for her," he said, pointing at Sarah. "But they met me instead. If they come again, they'll meet all of us." His words cut through the whispers like a blade. His eyes burned with resolve. He was no longer just a scavenger. He was a protector. The villagers fell silent. Some lowered their heads, ashamed of their earlier doubts. A few stepped forward, placing tools and weapons at Daniel's feet. One man said, "If you stand, we stand." Another added, "The raiders will return. We must be ready." The fire of unity began to spark. That night, Daniel worked beside Sarah. He helped her clean the shelter, patch the holes in the walls, and sharpened old tools into weapons. Sarah's hands glowed faintly as she healed his wounds. Each time her touch closed a cut, Daniel felt the strange warmth of her gift. It was more than healing, it was trust. Leora crawled across the blanket, giggling softly. Her glow returned, brighter now. She reached for Daniel's hand and gripped. His finger with tiny strength. Daniel smiled, despite the weight pressing on him. The baby's laughter filled the small room like music. Sarah watched, her eyes soft, and for the first time since he found her, she seemed to breathe without fear. But Daniel knew the peace would not last. The raiders had retreated, not been destroyed. Their leader had promised to return, and he would keep that promise. The thought burned in Daniel's mind. He could not wait for the storm to fall. He had to prepare. The next day, he walked through the village with Sarah at his side. Some villagers stepped back when they saw her. Others whispered. But Daniel ignored them. His voice carried strength as he said, "We need walls, we need traps, we need fire ready." He pointed at the hills where smoke had risen the night before. "They are not finished. Neither are we." Men and women began to work. Some cut wood, others dug trenches, children carried stones. The village moved like a single body, fear turning into action. Daniel led them, his hands rough, his back bent, but his eyes sharp with purpose. Sarah stayed near, watching over Leora. Her eyes followed Daniel, filled with something deeper than gratitude, a growing bond she could not name. As the sun set, torches lit the village. Walls of wood and stone began to rise. Fires burned in circles around the fields. The villagers stood with weapons in their hands, their hearts steady. They had been afraid before, but now they had something worth protecting. That night, Daniel sat with Sarah outside the shelter. The stars shone above, bright and endless. Sarah looked at him, her voice soft. "Why?" she asked. Her words were broken but clear enough. Daniel turned to her, confused. She pointed to herself and Leora. "Why help?" Daniel's eyes softened. He thought of his past, of the family he had lost to war. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Because no one helped me," he whispered. "I swore if I ever had the chance I wouldn't let another family be destroyed." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She placed her hand on his. Her touch was light but filled with meaning. Leora stirred in her sleep, the glow on her skin pulsing like a heartbeat. Daniel watched her and felt the weight of his promise once more. He would protect them, not only because they needed him, but because they had given him something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. The fire crackled. The sound of drums echoed faintly from the hills. The raiders were not far. They were gathering again, stronger. Daniel stood, his rifle across his back, his voice steady. "Let them come," he said. His eyes blazed with resolve. "This time we will be ready." The night grew darker, but the fire of unity burned brighter. Sarah held her child close. The villagers tightened their grip on their weapons, and Daniel stood tall, a man who had chosen to fight not for himself, but for the family he had found in the ashes. The night was silent before the storm. Daniel stood at the edge of the village with his rifle in hand. His eyes scanned the hills where faint fires burned in the distance. He knew the raiders were there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Behind him, the villagers stood ready, their faces pale but determined. Torches flickered in the wind, casting long shadows on the ground. Inside the shelter, Sarah held Leora close. The baby's glow pulsed softly like a beating heart. Sarah's hands trembled as she brushed dust from her child's hair. She whispered in her own tongue, a lullaby mixed with fear. Her eyes turned toward the door again and again, waiting for Daniel to return. The drums came first, low and steady, rolling across the night like thunder. The villagers tightened their grip on their weapons. Daniel's heart pounded. He had faced them once, but now there were more. Their fires lit the hills like stars of war. And then, the shadows moved. The raiders poured down from the hills, their blades flashing, their voices howling like beasts. Daniel raised his rifle and fired. The crack echoed through the valley. The villagers shouted and charged. The battle began. Flames rose as torches clashed. The ground shook under the stamp of feet. Daniel fought at the front, his arms burning with pain but his spirit unbroken. He swung his rifle like a staff, striking down those who came too close. His eyes blazed with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. Sarah stood at the doorway, torn between fear and courage. Leora's glow grew brighter, the mark on her skin shining like fire. Sarah whispered words Daniel could not hear, her hands glowing as she sent waves of healing to those who staggered back wounded. The villagers gasped at her gift, seeing for the first time that she was not a curse, but a blessing. The raiders roared in anger. Their leader stepped forward, the tall one with cold eyes, his blade shone in the firelight. He shouted in his language, pointing at Sarah and Leora. Daniel understood without words. The man would not stop until he took the child. Daniel's body ached, but his spirit flared. He charged at the leader, their blades and weapons clashing with sparks. Each strike shook Daniel's arms. Each block sent pain through his bones, but he did not stop. He could not stop. Behind him, Sarah cried his name, her voice filled with fear and hope. The leader sneered, stronger and faster. His blade cut into Daniel's shoulder, blood spilling across his chest. Daniel staggered but stood tall again. His voice broke through the chaos. "You'll never have them," he shouted. His rifle slammed against the leader's face. The man stumbled back, rage flashing in his eyes. Then a light burst across the battlefield. Leora's glow had grown so bright it lit the night like dawn. The raiders froze, fear spreading across their faces. The mark on her skin pulsed like fire. Sarah held her child high, her voice sharp with defiance. The villagers, inspired, roared as they charged. Together they pushed the raiders back. Fire and steel, stone and will. The villagers fought like people defending their very souls. And at the front stood Daniel, his body broken but his heart blazing. The leader screamed in rage, but the sight of Leora's light shattered his courage. He turned and fled into the darkness, his raiders scattering after him. The battle ended in silence, broken only by heavy breaths and the crackle of fire. Bodies lay on the ground, smoke rising into the air. But the village still stood. Sarah knelt with Leora, tears streaming down her face. Daniel stumbled toward them, blood on his clothes, but his eyes soft. Sarah reached for him, her hands glowing as she healed his wounds. Daniel winced but did not pull away. He looked at her and then at the child, his voice weak but steady. "It's over," he whispered. Sarah shook her head, her tears falling onto his hands. "Safe," she said, her voice trembling but sure. The villagers gathered, their eyes wide with awe. They had seen Daniel fight. They had seen Sarah heal. They had seen the child's light. The whispers that once carried fear now carried respect. An old man stepped forward, his voice loud. They are not outsiders anymore. They are family, the crowd murmured in agreement, heads nodding, voices rising. Daniel looked at Sarah and Leora. His heart swelled with a warmth he had not felt in years. He had lost everything once, but now, from the ashes, he had found something greater. Sarah placed her hand over his. Leora's tiny fingers gripped his thumb. The promise was no longer silent, it was alive. The fires of the battle faded, leaving only smoke and stars. The village rebuilt with stronger hands, no longer divided, but united. And in the center of it stood Daniel, Sarah, and Leora, a family forged not by blood, but by courage, sacrifice, and love. As dawn broke, the sky painted in gold. Daniel held Leora in his arms. She laughed, her glow soft as morning light. Sarah stood beside him, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. Daniel looked at them and whispered, "You're my family now." The words carried through, the air like a vow, not only for Sarah and her child, but for the village, for the future. For from the ashes of war and fear, a new beginning had been born, a family forged in fire, a promise stronger than death.